On the afternoon of November 24, 1971, a man in a dark suit boarded Northwest Orient Flight 305. He wasn't memorable. That, in hindsight, was his greatest weapon. He paid cash for a one-way ticket from Portland to Seattle. No luggage worth noting. No rush. No nerves. Just a quiet man in his mid-40s, neatly dressed, carrying a black briefcase and wearing dark sunglasses despite the fading autumn light. He took seat 18C. At 2:50 p.m., the plane took off. No one on board had any idea they were about to witness the only unsolved air piracy case in American history. Minutes after reaching cruising altitude, the man leaned toward a flight attendant named Florence Schaffner. He handed her a folded note. She assumed it was a phone number, she got those often, and slipped it into her pocket without reading it. The man leaned closer. "You should read that. I have a bomb." Florence unfolded the paper. Inside were careful, deliberate words. Not rushed. Not panicked. He demanded $200,000 in cash. 4 parachutes. And a fuel truck waiting in Seattle. No threats. No shouting. Just certainty. When Florence asked to see the bomb, he opened his briefcase slightly. Inside were 8 red cylinders, wires, and a battery. Real or not, it was convincing enough. The cabin remained calm. Passengers laughed. Drank cocktails. Flipped through magazines. No one screamed. No one ran. The hijacker didn't wear a mask. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even stand up. He ordered bourbon and soda. He tipped the flight attendant. And as the plane descended toward Seattle, the man who would soon be known to the world as D.B. Cooper looked out the window calmly, as if he already knew how this would end. When the plane landed, the demands were met. $200,000 in 20s. Serial numbers recorded. 4 parachutes delivered. Fuel truck waiting. Cooper allowed the passengers to leave. But he stayed. With the flight crew. And the night sky. Flight 305 took off again, heading south toward Mexico, flying low and slow through storm clouds and darkness. The cabin lights were dimmed. Rain battered the fuselage. Winds howled. At some point over the forests of the Pacific Northwest, Cooper stood up. He tied the money to himself. He put on a parachute. He opened the rear stairway of the Boeing 727, a feature that would later be redesigned because of what he was about to do. And somewhere between Seattle and Reno, at roughly 10,000 feet, in freezing rain, at night, over rugged wilderness, D.B. Cooper stepped into history. Then vanished. No body. No parachute. No confirmed trace. Just questions. Did he survive the jump? Did he die instantly in the dark forests below? Was he a trained paratrooper, or a desperate man gambling everything? For more than 50 years, the FBI chased ghosts. Suspects came and went. Confessions surfaced. Evidence contradicted itself. Myths grew larger than facts. And yet, the mystery endured. Because some disappearances aren't accidents. They're designs. And some men don't want to be remembered. They want to be unanswered. Witnesses described him differently. One said he was stocky, another lean. One believed he had brown hair, another said black. Age estimates ranged from late 30s to early 50s. No 2 accounts matched perfectly, and in the chaos of the hijacking, that didn't matter to Cooper. Flight attendant Florence Schaffner remembered one thing clearly, his calm. Nothing about him screamed desperation. He was polite, almost cordial. He joked lightly. He didn't threaten unnecessarily. He didn't raise his voice. He commanded the crew through presence, not aggression. That was unusual. Most hijackers screamed or waved weapons. Cooper quietly controlled the room. The FBI arrived in Seattle hours after the plane landed. Agents examined the money, the parachutes, and the flight logs. Within days, they had pieced together a profile, but one built on assumptions, not facts. They believed the man was white, male, mid-40s, familiar with aviation, possibly military trained. But beyond that, clues were scarce. No fingerprints on the parachutes. No personal items left behind. The briefcase, the bomb device, even the notes, all carefully wiped clean of identifying marks. As the investigation deepened, initial mistakes multiplied. Witnesses were questioned inconsistently. Flight attendants gave slightly different accounts each time. The serial numbers on the money were recorded meticulously, but by the time large-scale alerts went out, some bills had already entered circulation. The plane's flight path south was traced, but Cooper's jump location remained only a rough estimate. Forests, rivers, and mountains made precise tracking impossible. By the end of the first week, the FBI had hundreds of leads, almost all of them dead ends. Yet even amid the chaos, Cooper's behavior left subtle patterns. He had studied the Boeing 727, knowing about the rear stairway and how to lower it mid-flight. He calculated fuel requirements, airspeed, and altitude, showing familiarity with flight mechanics. He carried a fake or real bomb that would intimidate without alerting passengers, controlled fear, not panic. He had the composure to step outside into the storm at night and vanish. The more the FBI investigated, the more Cooper seemed like a ghost aware of every step of the law's response. And then came the first critical errors that shaped decades of misdirection. The jump zone was estimated, not verified. Forest terrain and low visibility meant that search teams combed enormous swathes with no result. Witness statements were treated as fact instead of pieces of a puzzle. Height, weight, hair color, accent, all varied, and analysts tried to force them to align. The serial numbers of the money, the only traceable evidence, were scattered through circulation for years, creating false leads. Alternative suspects, ranging from experienced paratroopers to ordinary criminals, were prioritized over the behavioral analysis of Cooper himself, leaving a major blind spot. Every misstep added mystery. Every contradiction fueled myth. And yet, there were clues overlooked by many. Torn fragments of the parachute, found years later along riverbanks. A single bundle of marked bills discovered buried in a remote area in 1980, decades after the hijacking. Behavioral insights suggesting Cooper was careful, patient, and highly skilled, not the amateur some suspects were assumed to be. Modern analysis, applied to these details, reveals a pattern. Cooper planned the jump meticulously, selected his exit point strategically, and almost certainly survived the fall. But at the time, in 1971, all the FBI had was chaos, incomplete witness data, and the beginnings of a cultural legend that would outlive the investigation itself. And so, the first phase of the investigation ended as it began. A man vanished without a trace, leaving only questions and a blueprint for obsession and speculation. Flight attendants remembered small details that seemed trivial at the time, but in hindsight, they were critical. He preferred window seats, giving him a clear view of the rear stairway. He used polite, formal language throughout, avoiding slang or casual speech. He handled his briefcase with care, never revealing its contents unnecessarily, maintaining an air of calm control. One passenger, who noticed him reading a magazine, later recalled he frequently scanned the cabin. Not with nervousness, but with awareness. Observant. Alert. Each movement deliberate. Investigators began to piece together a psychological profile. Likely male, mid-40s, calm under pressure, strategic thinker. Likely had some knowledge of parachuting or military training. Could carry out tasks methodically without panicking, suggesting discipline and physical capability. Comfortable with risk, willing to jump at night into unknown terrain with minimal gear. The FBI created a sketch based on these behaviors, which surprisingly resembles the description that circulated in newspapers at the time. But witnesses were inconsistent, giving agents conflicting details. His height, weight, facial hair, even hair color varied from one report to the next. Meanwhile, the cash Cooper demanded became a focal point. Serial numbers were meticulously recorded, a painstaking task. The FBI theorized that tracking these bills would eventually lead to the culprit. But decades later, only a fragment surfaced. $5,800 discovered in 1980 along the Columbia River, buried in sand and silt, partially decomposed. This small clue offered more questions than answers. How did the bills end up there? Did Cooper survive the jump and deliberately stash part of the money? Or did someone else handle it later? The FBI also studied the plane's flight path. Northwest Orient Flight 305 had taken off from Seattle for a secondary leg to Reno. Investigators mapped the potential jump zone: dense forest, rivers, rugged terrain, unpredictable weather. The likelihood of survival seemed low. Yet the precision of the hijacking suggested planning for these exact conditions. Cooper wasn't a gambler, he was a strategist. Public fascination exploded. Headlines called him the mysterious skyjacker, Phantom of the Pacific Northwest, and later simply D.B. Cooper. Letters, confessions, false sightings, and hoaxes flooded law enforcement. Yet none led to a confirmed suspect. Modern forensic analysis re-examines the flight logs, weather reports, and behavioral patterns. Some experts now suggest Cooper could have chosen the jump location to maximize concealment. He may have had survival skills sufficient to navigate the wilderness. The fragment of cash recovered indicates he had intent to retrieve or hide portions of the loot. Each new hypothesis complicates the narrative. Every clue offers a fork in the trail, creating layers of intrigue that persist to this day. By the end of Part 3, it is clear, D.B. Cooper was not an amateur, not a luck-driven criminal, and certainly not a ghost who disappeared without trace. He was methodical, careful, and every movement calculated, leaving the FBI chasing a shadow across decades, across forests, rivers, and mountains. For decades, the FBI followed every lead, hundreds of suspects, thousands of tips, dozens of confessions, all dead ends. But in 1980, nearly a decade after the jump, a breakthrough appeared. $5,800 in deteriorated cash, matching the serial numbers from Cooper's ransom, was discovered buried along the Columbia River, partially exposed by seasonal floods. It was the first tangible proof that the man had touched the money after the hijacking. Theories proliferated instantly. Did Cooper survive the jump and deliberately hide a portion of the loot? Had the river claimed some of the cash, leaving only fragments? Or had someone else stumbled across the stash years later? Forensic experts reconstructed the jump conditions using modern techniques. Low night visibility, heavy winds and rain, rugged terrain with rivers, trees, and ravines. The calculations were grim. Survival rates were low, but not impossible. Experts concluded that a man with parachuting experience, planning skills, and survival knowledge could have landed successfully. Cooper had prepared for the worst and anticipated the environment. Further insights came from behavioral analysis. Cooper had displayed meticulous planning throughout the hijacking, calculating fuel, altitude, and airspeed for the jump. Selecting a rear stairway exit, a feature few would even consider. Controlling the cabin calmly, reducing chaos and attention. These observations reinforced the idea that Cooper was not a desperate criminal but a calculated operator, someone trained, disciplined, and aware of risk management. Investigators also revisited eyewitness accounts. Witnesses recalled that he had checked the parachutes with care, monitored the aircraft instruments, maintained composure even during turbulence. All suggested a familiarity with both aircraft mechanics and jumping protocols. Modern researchers proposed several plausible scenarios. Survival with the money. Cooper lands undetected, disperses into the wilderness, and eventually vanishes into obscurity. The river cache may have been part of a planned cache. Fatal landing. Cooper jumps, succumbs to injuries or exposure, and the wilderness claims his body. The money partially washes downstream. Elaborate escape. Cooper staged the disappearance, leaving clues to mislead authorities, and starts a new life elsewhere. Each scenario carries its own probability. The most likely, according to contemporary analysis, is survival with careful concealment, supported by the discovery of river cache. Absence of a body. Witness accounts suggesting calm, strategic behavior. What makes Cooper's story uniquely compelling is the interplay between human skill and natural chaos. He exploited the environment and human perception, manipulating both to vanish entirely. By the late 1980s, the FBI officially closed the case as unsolved, maintaining an open file but acknowledging the limits of evidence. New forensic technology, DNA, geospatial mapping, and behavioral profiling, offered tantalizing possibilities, yet Cooper remained elusive. For historians, aviation experts, and criminologists, Cooper represents a paradigm of careful criminal execution. Psychological mastery, manipulating fear without aggression. Operational mastery, controlling the aircraft and environment. Strategic foresight, planning the jump, anticipating variables. And for the public, he became a legend, a phantom in the skies whose story captured imagination and inspired decades of speculation. By the end of Part 4, it is clear, D.B. Cooper's fate is partially illuminated, but still shrouded in mystery, a puzzle of skill, audacity, and circumstance. The D.B. Cooper hijacking did not end with the plane landing, the money handed over, or his disappearance into the night. Its aftermath rippled across aviation, law enforcement, and American culture. Airlines immediately implemented new security protocols. Locking mechanisms for rear stairways were redesigned. Passenger screenings were intensified. Crew training emphasized hostage negotiation and situational awareness. In effect, Cooper's daring jump permanently changed air travel. Every commercial flight, even decades later, carries the legacy of his audacity. But beyond regulations, Cooper's story took on a mythic life. Newspapers ran endless columns, speculating on suspects, motives, and survival scenarios. Television documentaries replayed the hijacking scene by scene. Each recounting added to the legend, while obscuring the human at the center. the man who took a risk so calculated that it became the ultimate unsolved mystery. FBI agents who worked on the case reflected on its complexity. For decades, the search consumed manpower, resources, and time. Agents studied hundreds of suspects, sifted through confessions, and pursued tips that led nowhere. Some left the bureau without closure, carrying the weight of a mystery that might never be solved. Then came the modern resurgence of interest. Amateur investigators and historians applied digital mapping, DNA testing, and behavioral profiling to old evidence. The Columbia River cache, long the only physical trace, was re-examined. The pattern of his meticulous planning and calm demeanor suggested something extraordinary. The man likely planned for long-term survival, perhaps disappearing into the wilderness and ultimately vanishing from human record. Fans and true crime enthusiasts began to theorize with fervor. Some believed he lived decades under a new identity. Others imagined him perishing in the forests, leaving the legend intact. What remained clear, however, was that Cooper had outwitted one of the most resourceful investigative agencies of the 20th century. Culturally, his story inspired films, novels, songs, and television episodes. To some, he became an anti-hero, a symbol of daring ingenuity against bureaucracy. To others, he was a criminal whose cleverness overshadowed morality. Yet all interpretations circled back to one immutable truth: the man vanished, leaving only questions, evidence fragments, and awe. Even today, the D.B. Cooper case serves as a study in human behavior. Psychologists highlight his strategic risk assessment, calculating every variable before committing to the jump; behavioral manipulation, calming flight attendants, controlling passengers without aggression; operational planning, understanding aircraft mechanics, fuel calculations, and landing possibilities. And perhaps most fascinatingly, Cooper's story reminds us of human imagination and myth-making. Society projected onto him narratives of heroism, criminal genius, and ultimate escape. His legend grows with each retelling, fueled as much by what is unknown as by what is known. In practical terms, Cooper's hijacking reshaped aviation forever. But in the collective consciousness, he became a symbol of the unsolvable, a reminder that some mysteries are never fully contained. As the case moved into historical analysis, investigators, writers, and enthusiasts alike grappled with the same question: did Cooper survive? Modern forensic simulations and environmental reconstructions suggest a plausible survival scenario. Considering wind speeds, forest density, and his meticulous preparation, survival was difficult but not impossible. And with the 1980 discovery of part of the ransom money, speculation intensified. If Cooper survived, he had partial success in hiding the evidence, leaving fragments as breadcrumbs for future detectives. D.B. Cooper vanished into the night, but the echoes of his audacity remain. Not in law enforcement files alone, nor in the headlines that sensationalized his story, but in the way humanity grapples with the unknown. The plane's rear stairway, once a mere mechanical feature, became the stage of legend. Forests, rivers, and rugged terrain became silent witnesses. And the ransom money, fragments of which surfaced decades later, serves as a physical reminder of what was planned, executed, and lost to history. For aviation, Cooper's jump forced permanent change. Security protocols, screening procedures, and crew training were all reshaped, an entire system hardened against one man's foresight and audacity. Yet, despite the procedural legacy, the human fascination endures. Why? Because Cooper embodies a paradox: meticulous criminality paired with human imagination. His story reminds us that intelligence, preparation, and courage can outpace even the most sophisticated systems, but also that such acts are unpredictable, uncontainable, and morally ambiguous. Modern investigators, historians, and enthusiasts still debate his fate. Did he survive? Did he perish quietly? Will he ever be definitively identified? Perhaps the beauty of the mystery lies in its unresolved nature. Some puzzles are meant not to be solved, but to illuminate the limits of human understanding. And there is another layer: the people affected. Flight attendants who witnessed his calmness under threat. Passengers who disembarked unaware of what almost transpired above them. Investigators who chased decades of leads, balancing duty and frustration. The narrative of D.B. Cooper is not just about disappearance, it is about the human experience of uncertainty, risk, and awe. In the end, Cooper's story teaches us: every mystery leaves a mark, even without closure. Courage and preparation can create legends. Human fascination thrives on the unknown. True mastery of risk is rarely recognized in its moment. As the decades pass, D.B. Cooper remains a symbol of calculated boldness, a figure who stepped into history and chose invisibility over notoriety. The money, the plane, the flight, all fade. But the story persists. And as with every case we explore in Mystery Files, there is a final, solemn reflection. Every mystery leaves behind a voice. Not always heard. Not always answered. But present. And in D.B. Cooper's case, we've listened. We've traced the planning, the execution, the aftermath. We've felt the tension, the audacity, and the lingering shadow. Some mysteries remain unresolved, yet they teach us more than solutions ever could. Because the greatest stories are those that challenge perception, demand imagination, and leave a mark across time.